Hey folks, welcome to the final episode here in the Lemuria Let's Play. And yeah, we won. So everybody, we didn't have any final battles. Everybody just kind of ended their turn. There's this cool thing you can do at the end where you can kind of see the growth of nations. So we'll kind of watch that. As you can see, we're expanding very well. Bogarus actually expanding pretty well. Kalem expanding pretty well. But this is when I probably really start kicking it into gear. And you can see our territory with the flags and Dominion as the color. So it's kind of hard to tell, but we're actually really big at this point. We're starting to eat Phlegra. And now it's like, okay, Phlegra's lost forts. Phlegra's lost his cap. Marignon and I are jousting. Atlantis is attacking me. Meanwhile, Kalem has attacked Agartha, and I'm jousting with Kalem, and then we make peace. And meanwhile, I've been eating Marignon. And still jousting with Atlantis, but now Atlantis is kind of withering, and I've taken this fort, and I'm proceeding to take the rest of his infrastructure. Meanwhile, Kalem and I are just still grinding it out, and I'm fighting Pythium now, and we're raiding a bunch of the Pythium lands. And yeah, quickly the map is turning purple as our dominion spreads, but you can see Gath is pretty big. Satis has a portion carved out, and Pythium is kind of withered at the vine. So, that is the history. And we'll look at that again through all the score graphs. So, score graphs. The provinces, it's kind of what you expected. It's kind of hard to tell. At the very beginning, Arco's actually in the lead, which is interesting. So Arco had pretty solid expansion. I don't know if there was anybody else right at the very beginning who was doing exceptionally well. Kalem was second place for a long time, but then you can see, and honestly, this is kind of how I think a lot about the game and score graphs. You guys know that because you watch me play, but I'm always checking them. And if I'm in a war where I'm losing, like Kalem's been doing here, I'll generally try to get out, even if it puts the game in jeopardy. Now, because like you can see here, while Kalem was in like a clear position too, Gath basically was eating and getting bigger and stronger. Meanwhile, Kalem was getting depleted of all his resources while fighting me, and at the same time getting smaller. So anyway, it was a slow grind with Kalem, and then we were just exploding here at the end. But this was a pretty exciting game because it was just non-stop action. I got attacked. God, when did Phlegra start attacking me? Right here. So from here onwards, which there's like this tiny little flat period. From here onwards, we were at war nonstop, basically, with 2 to 4 people, depending on the time. So anyway, that's the province graph. Yeah, for forts, you can see we just ran away with it in terms of forts. But that's, I mean, Lemuria is a nation where you fort up, so this isn't really like an apples to apples comparison with other nations. Interestingly, Atlantis actually had a lot of forts. And that's something Atlantis kind of needs. Is actually kind of a not great part about Atlantis is they need more infrastructure than most nations because they need kind of separate infrastructure for their troops and for their mages. You want to build things underwater for mages and forts on land for troops. So it's kind of, money you have to put into infrastructure that otherwise could go into army or research. Kalem, though, had a lot of forts as well. And so Kalem and Gath were kind of tied in forts. And Satis actually had a very comparable number of forts to everyone else, despite the fact they were much bigger than him. Over here we have Pythium. Pythium didn't have a lot of forts, but Pythium doesn't need a lot of forts. I know Pythium was relying a lot on foreign recruit mages. So there's that. Income. So income, you can see we're actually doing pretty okay. Like, about the time when our first war broke out with Phlegra, we had about the same income Phlegra did, which was pretty impressive. Bogarus in our first conflict, we were about the same income as them. So income-wise, we were about tied. Fort-wise, though, at the same time, which would have been right around here, you can see we had a lot more forts, of course. But yeah, so anyway, on income, you can see Atlantis doing really well for the early mid game, just looking super good. And then this is when I think they started attacking me, and it was kind of a grindy stalemate for a while. Or maybe this is when Pythium attacked them, and then maybe they attacked me somewhere over here. Kind of hard to tell exactly, but they were definitely in a very solid position right here. I'm not sure what I would have done as Atlantis at this point in time right here, but they were in a very good position. And then Calum, too. Very high in income, and you can see they surpass Atlantis. And they are in a very, very solid income lead by about 30 turns ago, probably. So I'm betting you around this time, they were probably thinking, well, shit, Lemuria is a problem, like a big problem, we got to deal with them. But they were probably also thinking they had a really good shot at winning the game, because in some ways they were position 1 at this point in time. Like, they were the second biggest player, but income-wise, like, you know, they were the biggest, and in theory, Calum hard counters Lemuria, though I think we have certainly put that to the test. Having a very, very good Calum player, and then we fought for basically half the game at least. So anyway, income, Calum doing pretty okay until, and I think we were having some back and forth wars here. But this is when I was really turning up the pressure on the war with Calum, and he just really started losing ground, and my Dominion was pushing, and there was unrest starting to build up in his lands. Just a lot of things, I think, that kind of ended up turning that downwards for him. And meanwhile, you know, Gath, this is probably when, I think this is really when Calum started really attacking me, maybe right here. And so he was probably begging Gath to jump in and attack me. But you can see right here, if Gath went and attacked me, he probably wouldn't have had much income or land. But this period of time while Calum was begging Gath to attack him was really the most productive time for Gath. You know, he got his Dominion spread in all of Arco's lands. He was eating more of Bogarus, eating Satis. Like, I mean, this was the most efficient time that Gath had all game. And meanwhile, Calum, who was in a position above Gath, was getting, you know, dragged through the mud having to fight me. So it's a very tough proposition. Like, if you imagine, now, I mean, you can look back on it and say, well, you know, but Lemuria won, so it doesn't matter that Gath got this big. But, you know, for Gath to be able to win, they were going to they needed to eat those small nations. So I don't know. I think it would have been a different game. I don't know if the outcome would have been different, right? So it's easy to kind of Monday morning quarterback, but it could have also been checkmate a little bit, even this far back, or more close to checkmate, where, you know, whatever Gath did wasn't going to matter as much. But this put Gath in a pretty solid position where if Calum managed to hang on, or like, ideally for Gath, Calum slowly won. If Calum slowly won against me, this would have been great for Gath, because this would have put him in a true position 1. And I think that was probably what he was mostly banking on. But Calum slowly losing was probably not great for him. So this was kind of Calum bleeding out here. Anyway, and so you can see Gath is in a clear first place for income. And then anything else of note? Yeah, I mean, Satis and Pythium were both about tied. So they were like the middle of the pack. I was actually a little above them most of the game. And then towards the end of the game, I got higher than them. I kind of thought they were a little poorer than this. I don't know. I thought that I was maybe a bit more ahead of them in income than I was. But Gath was really rich. I had no idea how much money Gath was raking in a turn. I figured with blood hunting it was probably less, but no, he was raking in a lot of money. Gym income. This is probably the most important graph for us. Because, like, forts, you're always going to kind of have something like this as Lemuria. I mean, province is obviously important, but gym income, we just crushed it, guys. We crushed it. We were in first place basically the whole game. There were just moments where somebody got ahead, but, I mean, we crushed it. We just made site searching a really big priority. We had pretty good luck with indie mages. We used our pretender to site search. I mean, we crushed gym economy. I posted a screenshot when the game was about to end of my gym income, and people were like their mouths were on the floor when they saw it. I mean, it was nuts how much gym income I had. Like 90 death gems, 40 of a couple things, 30 of a lot, 20 of the rest. There's a lot. And then plus I was getting like global payoffs from Gath. And then research. Research is interesting. So I thought Pythium was in first place for research. They were kind of bragging about how good a research they had, but Pythium was actually getting crushed in research by Calum. Calum was just the research leader. I'm a little surprised. I thought nobody hit 9s yet. 9s everywhere. Because we don't see it flattening out for anyone. But yeah, I thought I was much closer to Calum, and I thought Pythium was farther ahead. Gath, actually, I ended up beating Gath in research, which I'm a little impressed with, actually. I had no idea I was ahead of research in comparison to Gath. So that would have boded well for our war to come. And our research was, it's kind of like a very gradual inflection up. But we don't have the limits of like upkeep and things like that. And then I was getting to the point I had a lot of money, but I didn't have a lot of other easy forts to build. So I was going to start building more labs. So I probably would have gotten 9s in a reasonable time. But yeah, I would say our research was pretty good. Some of it was from trading for lanterns and stuff, but really, honestly, a lot of it was from the free spawn mages. And then some of our mages we found. Early, for hitting some of the early research timings, we traded for some lightless lanterns with Agartha and then with Pythium. And those were helpful for early timings, but they didn't really, especially like by here, they made up a very small fraction of the bulk of our research. Maybe 10 or 15%. But early it was pretty significant. But Calum, you could kind of see him flexing at the end. He had golems, he had artifacts all out. He was fighting over globals a lot. He had a lot of them researched. He had tarts out. He was pretty close to 9s everywhere. So anyway, Calum crushing research. Pythium doing very good with research, but not really able to convert that into a lot of military might. Dominion, we were just off the charts, guys. And again, this is something you kind of expect with Lemuria, but I had just so much down pressure. And it was causing all my neighbors to have to invest a lot of resources in fighting off my down pressure, which kept it from getting bigger. But still, at the same time, it was like, depleting their resources. It was a war of sorts, right? Where they had to commit mages and priests and whatnot and money to battle my dom push. So we were okay with that. Army size, I mean, come on. What's interesting here, let's look at Calum. Calum had a few major losses. Like here, it looks compressed just because it's all towards the bottom of the graph, but this was a major loss. And then this was a major loss. In fact, their overall army trend was down over the course of the war with me. Which is interesting. It went down here, and I don't know what this was from. I think this might have been like an early skirmish with them. I can't remember. Or maybe this is from fighting Agartha. I'm not sure what this was. Gath's army was growing, but a lot of this was really high quality stuff, like this were the Seer and things like that. But yeah, I mean, we were up and up and up, and towards the end it was even more. Well, I mean, this is the last turn, so nobody died. And this is the Battle of Satis, so we got hit with flames from the sky. Basically, every time we get hit from flames from the sky, normally bad things happen the next turn, but we were solid, and then Ascension points, yeah, we won. So let's do kind of closing thoughts. What are our closing thoughts? Is Lemuria overpowered? I think that's the first question that begs attention. I think the answer is Lemuria is very strong. They're I don't think a great new player game or nation, because they require some finesse. You have to know Uh, Basically, the ways Lemuria dies aren't soldiers coming up and smacking it with swords. Most of the time, it's like different kinds of magic, so you need to know what all the kinds of magic are. And then usually, like the hardest thing for Lemuria, like you saw in the battle with, like the war with Calum, I was really not ever going for his forts, and that's because going for forts means taking like a head-on fight, and we really are not very good against head-on fights. So, you have to know when you can take a fight and when you can't, and a lot of times with Lemuria you cannot take a fight, and so that's a pretty important part. They're very strong. They're a very snowballing nation because the bigger you get, the more forts you have, the more dom pressure you have, the more free spawn you get. And once you get a critical amount of forts up, it's really hard for people to bite into you. And then if they do, it's like they wish they hadn't almost, because now they've got like a 0 pop fort to try to defend. So, I think the strongest part is it's really hard once a Lemuria, especially for a good Lemuria player, once they get set in, it's really hard to efficiently clear them out, which makes forming a coalition difficult, especially if you're doing a bit of Diplo, because the payouts are going to be very asymmetric. Like, whoever was going to attack me on my original border, like on this part, was going to get nothing. Even if they won, they get like 1-0 pop fort, which they can't really defend. Right? And if they move armies in, they're going to have supply items, all of this garbage, right? But meanwhile, whoever's attacking me on some new territory, some new front, they're potentially going to get all the money. And like earlier, that would have been down here in Falegra or Marignan, or the Atlantis, Bogarus area. So it's definitely a kind of thing with like asymmetrical payouts. So it's hard for what you're trying to do if you're forming a coalition against them is like have two of the people that say they're going to fight, but they're not going to get shit out of it, and then you're going to have two of the people who are going to fight, and they're going to get a bunch of money, and presumably there's not as many forts. They can definitely be spanked. They can be spanked. I think they're strong, but not like completely overpowered. I don't think they need major changes in terms of like making them balanced. But this game definitely shows how they can snowball. Now, there were a few things that led to that. One of them was I had extremely lucky neighbors. So in the game setup, I picked my nation first, and then everybody else picked nation second. So presumably everybody got, some way to counter me. Either they had magic weapons, in their bless, or they had, special ways of dealing with me. Well, I got the luckiest neighbors, and that I got like a Gartha who can kind of do some things against Lemuria, but not really. Like, I can't use my consoles against them very well, but like crossbows, and most of his guys are going to get wrecked by Lemuria. But anyway, there's things you could probably do if you knew you were going to be next to Lemuria and you wanted to rush him as a Gartha, where you could kind of be okay. But the two hardest counters to Lemuria are really Calum and Gath. And those, not Gath, Calum and Atlantis. And I didn't start next to those. And so that was the biggest thing. Especially this Calum player is very solid. So I think there's a decent chance that if I started next to Calum, I would have lost this game. If I started next to Atlantis, the Atlantis player is good, but not on the level, in my opinion, of the Calum player. Like, the Calum player played out of his mind, and always does, in all the games I've seen him in. So I think if I started next to Calum, I probably would have lost. If I started next to Atlantis, it would have been shitty, because there's no efficient way to kill large Atlantis stuff. And it would have stopped me from eating anybody else in the mid-game. And I really liked I snowballed. I got out of control. And I couldn't have done that if I were fighting Atlantis, just because it's such a shitty matchup for Lemuria. So we'll see. We'll never know what will happen in the game with all the same players where I start next to Calum or Atlantis, but It's bad news. We'll just put it that way. Other people have tools to deal with it. Like you can have sacreds or something, but it's the thing that make both those nations hard is it's the combination of magic weapons everywhere and death mages. And if you have that, you have the tools to counter Lemuria pretty good. So yeah, that I don't think it's overpowered. I think they can be hard countered, but if you get lucky and don't start next to a hard counter, you're in pretty good shape. And then even if you start next to the hard counter, especially if you can avoid like a 4v1 or something, you probably can survive. You're just not going to snowball and thrive like I did. Unless you can kind of get lucky or some diplomatic circumstances unfold correctly. But, I mean, you can see we beat Atlantis outright. We took Atlantis' cap this game. And we fought with Calum all game, and we were clearly winning the war. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible, horrible war for Calum. We couldn't really easily take infrastructure from him. I think we only got one fort. But we took all his land and money. Killed everything he held dear to him. All his thugs, all his super combatant-esque dudes. Everybody died. So, you can fight them, but you don't want to fight them before you have any research, is kind of the thing. Okay. So we've answered, do we think they're overpowered? We've talked a little bit about the early game. Let's talk a little bit. The other thing, too, I'll just say, is I think I played pretty well. I've played Lemuria. This is probably like my 5th time now. And most of the time when you see me play nations, it's going to be like my first time, because I don't really repeat nations very much on, like, once I play them on YouTube. That's kind of usually the last time I touch them. But here, I played Lemuria again just because I think they're a really fun nation, because they are so kind of like cloak and dagger. Hit and run. They're not a hammer, they're a finesse dagger. Anyway, so the first time I played them, I played them, like the first time I played them for YouTube, I've already played them like 3 or 4 times before. And this is my first time coming back to them again after that series. And I'm a better player than I was when I played them in that first YouTube series on Lemuria, but I also benefit from just generally being a better player, I think. And then also, having played that previous game, I learned a lot about Lemuria as well. So, yeah. Then what else? Let's see. In terms of how do you fight Lemuria, like given where people were, what should they have done? I think one of the mistakes people make is they're like, oh, go... Like, let's say there's a player you're worried about. They're really big in your game. And you're like, somebody's like, hey, I'm thinking about fighting the big player. And you're like, oh, yeah, man, that's awesome. Do it. See, that's not always a good move. Because you do not want to encourage people to get in a fight that they will probably lose. And they don't even have to, like, dramatically lose. Like, even Calum fighting me was good for me. I was getting so much money off the raiding war with Calum. Money and gems, and then keeping him down so he couldn't build up this overwhelming force and come knock it down my fort walls. Like, I wouldn't have made peace with him, I don't think, at the end. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want, like, if I was next to Phalegra and Bogarus. Now, Bogarus has tools to deal with me. They have banishment, they have death mages, and they have astral mages. But they didn't have enough in that first army they sent out to fight me. They would have needed a good bit more. And it could be worse. I didn't even really get great heroic traits, but like in my Ulm game, Lemuria had some consul who was their prophet that had heroic toughness or unequaled obesity or something. He had like 140 hit points. If you get lucky and you have that, then basically you don't even have to worry about dust to dust. You can like super combatant through that. So yeah, and then you can empower them in fire, and then do Phoenix power and stuff. But that, I mean, that's like mid-game stuff. But if Bogarus was going to attack me, they needed to do it. They had a lot of priests, but they didn't have death mages and they didn't have astral mages in that first army. So I think they probably should have waited until they felt more comfortable sending more mages and priests. And the problem is, like, they had to deathball so hard to keep me, like, to take a fight that they can win. I can just avoid the deathball and then pick around the edges. So, you know, even if they get a fort, I get, like, so much of their other stuff that probably it's not even worth it if they take the fort from me. And then Phlegra was just a horrible matchup. Agartha was a pretty bad matchup for them, and then Pythium was a pretty bad matchup for them, and Satis was a pretty bad matchup. So we got really, really, really lucky with our neighbors. But, okay, what would they have done? I think the best thing to do is they all threaten to fight me if I go to war with any of them. And then them to maybe negotiate getting a province or two from me in the trade-off, just to keep me contained. I think if you're starting next to Lemuria and you are Atlantis or Calum, or you have a bless for your sacreds you really believe in, you can rush Lemuria really early, like as soon as you see them. And that can just knock them out early, and you get all the Death Gem income from their cap. If you're not one of those two nations, and those two nations are not attacking them, then I think you want to wait until you have some critical research timing and send enough mages, and then you also need to have an efficient way to deal with their raiding. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Fire elementals are generally pretty good. Obviously, not all nations have that, but I mean, you have to figure out for your nation what you're going to do as a low commitment way to counter raiding. And then you have to be prepared to do like a heavy mage commitment and a death ball. Now, the other thing to think about is if you're fighting Lemuria, like if people are going to like 4v1 or something Lemuria, the nation that is the best matched to fight them is probably going to get most of the spoils. Like if there's an Atlantis in it, you know, Atlantis is probably going to get their cap. So then you have to ask, like, how much do you really want to commit to help Atlantis get their cap? And, you know, you'll pick from the fringes, so you'll probably want to commit something, but how much, you know, it's unclear. So, yeah. I think waiting to the right time until unless it's an Atlantis Calum neighbor situation, and then everybody attacking at the same time is probably a good way to deal with them. But that's pretty difficult to do, for everybody to be ready at the same time. People normally don't coordinate that well. And then other people are going to have their own ambitions, and Lemuria is going to be begging to backstab. So, like, if somebody attacks me and I kill 300 of their army, you better believe I'm going to let every one of their neighbors know. And one of their neighbors is going to feel pretty opportunistic. And, like, if Lemuria is getting 4v1, like, the bigger you make the coalition, the bigger incentive there is for somebody to backstab. Because, like, there's 4 people attacking him, and Lemuria killed one of their armies, but, you know, there's still 3 other players with huge armies in Lemuria. If I'm neighboring somebody that lost a 300 army, there's a pretty good chance I would backstab them. Because, I mean, I'm going to get all their land, and now I can fight Lemuria with their stuff, too. Meanwhile, you know, Lemuria is making a quagmire for 3 other players. That's actually what I want. I don't want them to quickly conquer Lemuria. I want them to slowly, painfully, barely conquer Lemuria while I eat stuff. So that is, I think, part of the problem in organizing like the perfect coalition. Because, I mean, I think you can look at this game different ways. You can say, oh man, Lucid had it easy, they never really coalitioned him. Or you can look at it as, hey, Lucid was in a 2v1 or up to a 4v1 for basically the entire game. And they're both in a way true. You know, like, I was coalition against basically the entire game, but I never, because they didn't all start at the same time with huge doom stacks, it never felt that bad. You know, like there was always at least a turn or two between when the big armies came in and I had to deal with them, so I could kind of shuffle forces around to make sure I dealt with it. So anyway, I think, you know, that's my lesson. I think I've learned from that. Do I think you should try to take Lemuria out of the game? Yeah, absolutely. If you have a small Lemuria, like if Lemuria is like 6 provinces or something, or 8 or something, they've been contained, or even 10. Like a 10 province Lemuria is dangerous, but they can be an asset, right? Because they're going to potentially cause trouble to all their neighbors. So, potentially if you border one of those neighbors, that Lemuria is an asset. And they're not like, holy shit, scary, right? But they are, if they break free and start gaining some ground, they can be a problem. But like a 5 or 6 province or 5 or 6 Fort Lemuria, I mean, they're in deep shit. They're basically kind of out of the game. So, I think by the time you get Lemuria down to like 5 provinces, the incentive is for all the neighbors to betray the coalition. Because you actually, if you're a neighbor to a coalition partner, once Lemuria gets down to like 5 or 6, I think you immediately attack people in the coalition and try to get their stuff before they finish off Lemuria. Because there's no need for like global safety to finish off a 6 province Lemuria, really. In the ultra late game, when you're worried about Underdark and stuff coming out, then yeah. But I mean, realistically, that's a very long way away. And like, I never cast Underdark. And I didn't want to. I mean, like, my opportunity cost for death gems is pretty high, and then people could pool all their gems and dispel Underdark, which is what they're going to do. So, I don't know. In, like, an ultra late game situation, I could probably arrange, like, a super high casting of it. But, yeah. I mean, I think in the situation where you would be able to do that, or would do that, you probably would have won the game anyway. And a 6 province Lemuria is not going to put up, or a 10 province Lemuria is not going to put up an Underdark that is undispellable or anything like that. So, yeah, I suppose all of you will have your own thoughts on how the coalition went, what you would do differently. But I think the important thing to think about is, and we were talking in the game chat afterwards, but I think, and I see it in Discord a lot, is people say, oh, will you just coalition them? Or, oh, will you just do this? Or, oh, will you just do this? And it's not always that simple, right? Because you have to understand everybody's an actor, like everybody's an agent, and they're all trying to do what's best for them. And it's never that simple as like just coalition, right? Because it's a question of who gets the rewards, who pays the cost, and those things are never lined up perfectly. But in general, yeah, anyway. Thoughts on research and things like that? Well, actually, let's do a different question. Let's do, when was I worried about losing? I was a little worried if Gath and Kalem were attacking me at the same time right after Gath finished Arco. He had Firestorm and I didn't. He probably could have taken a lot of this infrastructure from me. But I also would have raided the crap out of him. I think for Gath, a good move might have been trying to take Marignon from me. I don't know if he thought about it, but Marignon's cap has a place that basically kills my undead, which is really annoying. So I don't really want to have an army there. So like once he gets an army on top, even just baiting my army, like for me to move a huge doom stack on top of Marignon and then he moves off, like kills like a quarter of my guys. But there was a time, I think, right after he finished Arco, and his armies were out of position. But like attacking into Phlegra lands were pretty destroyed. And if he got a fort from me, it's like, okay, whatever, I'll get the fort back. They weren't worth much. But if he could have gotten Marignon from me at that point, that would have really made it where it was trouble for me to fight or conquer Atlantis. I think he had Firestorm or almost had Firestorm at that point. And so that was a point where I think I was a little vulnerable. But for him, it would have just, this shitstorm that Kalem got drug into. Right here. This would have been Gath. And Gath would have lost just a ton of stuff. Potentially I would have converted some of his cap-only dudes, like with apostasy. He wouldn't have been able to have nearly as many seer, because I would be hunting his blood hunting provinces like in 6 different ways. I would be teleporting in like 3 or 4 Grand Lemurs at a time. I would be raiding them from the sea. I would be sniping thugs with different kind of tools at my disposal. I would have basically made life hell because he had such a big border with me. So there's a very large incentive for him to not want to do that. But that would have been really painful, like if he took Marignan. And there was definitely a time where I think my Dominion hadn't gotten in Marignan for a long time. So there was probably a window for that. That might have been, Monday morning quarterbacking, a good move. But it would have come at an enormous cost. The other thing, though, and I was kind of prepared because I had a bunch of scouts to deal with assassin spam from Atlantis, but if he had Infernal Disease up, he would have to worry significantly less about my raiders, because he could just, Infernal Disease and then move an army in to kill them. But again, that's going to limit seer production and stuff. So, and what he did, during this time when he was not doing that, those were his most productive times in terms of territory gain. So I think it's hard to say. Like, I don't know if there's a right answer. And I think it's easy for us to say after the game's over, like, well, clearly you did the wrong thing because you won. But it wasn't that simple. Anyway, but that's one particular vulnerability I was really worried about Firestorm. Wrathful Skies I was a little worried about, but not super. It's not as... Wrathful Skies doesn't kill your stuff as quickly. Like, if you don't have the counter for Firestorm, you die really fast. Wrathful Skies, it takes a while, but it's harder to block. Like, Firestorm you can just block with Army of Gold. Wrathful Skies you can't really block. But it kills you more slowly. So anyway, I was worried there. I was worried when Calum first attacked Agartha that he would kind of come in and jump around fort to fort and pop forts, and eventually he would have like a fort popped he felt comfortable taking. And that would have been annoying. It would have mattered how many of those kind of armies he could field. And once I got Winds of Death, I felt way more comfortable fighting Calum. But before that, it was pretty hard, with Wailing Winds, for me to bring a big army to fight him. So I'm not sure what I would do there. If he were going to attack, like to full on attack, I had different things I could do, but I don't know. None of them. It wasn't super effective. Until I got Wind of Death, and then that was really when it changed for Calum. The other thing, and I think I learned this, one of the things I learned as a player, like the importance of magic pin gear between here and the last time I played Lemuria. And with that, basically, my Wind of Death traps were way more effective in this game than in previous games. I think you really got to see here just how potent that spell could be. But that was super important. So I was a little worried about that. I was never worried about Agartha attacking me. I was never worried about Pythium attacking me, and I was never worried about Satis attacking me. And I know each of those players felt like they got some heat for not attacking me earlier, but I think for them it did not really make sense to attack me at those times. I think if Calum and Gath attacked me, it might have made sense for them to come in and just chip in a bit. But they were also pretty small. So, I mean, presumably they would need to eat somebody else, and that would be more important than chipping in against the great baddie, because, if Calum and Gath conquer me and they get a tiny bit, they're not going to be in a position to win any more than, had I been the same size. So I was never really worried about that. The thing is, Skelly Spam's not scary, crossbows aren't that scary, they didn't have a lot of magic weapons. They all had death, so they could all do dust to dust, but for a while, they didn't really have an answer to my armies. So, and it wasn't very far into the game that I had access to Foul Vapors, which would have wrecked, not Satis, but Agartha. I mean, Satis we clashed a few times. I think it was kind of no contest. So yeah, it was a lot of fun because I was fighting and doing well, and I feel like I haven't really snowballed like this in a pretty long time. But I want to thank everybody who played. Special shout out to Balin Stalin, who played Agartha, for being my only true ally. Pythium, who I always felt was a somewhat begrudging ally. We did have peace for a long time. And then Satis and I were mostly at peace. Shout out to Kalem. If anything I have learned from this game, because I think once you play, like, one of the fun things about playing a nation multiple times is you're much better at it than you were before. One of the not great things is you don't learn as much. But every time I play with Janahito, I always learn something. And I think I really learned how to play Kalem just from watching him play. I mean, it is a really cool nation. They have lots of cool stuff they can do. I think they're really versatile. They have pretty high quality troops. There's just so much good, I think, I have to say about late age Kalem after watching him play. And he's always going to be doing cool stuff, not just like straightforward things. Like we saw the white mage thugs, cloud trapezing magic phase attacks, the golems with all the artifacts. His army composition was really scary. There are just a bunch of cool things. Wailing winds, all that stuff. Yeah, so anyway, thanks a lot for playing and showing us all that cool stuff. And then to Sakane, he was playing Gath. I don't know if he's going to put up any videos of this. I expect not, but you never know. But yeah, we were mostly at peace. He's the only person I never fought, I don't think, at all. But he definitely had me, a little worried. I think by the end, he was clearly the number 2. So if I didn't win, it was going to be probably Sack. So good job positioning himself to get in that position with, being number 2. And if we actually got into some big army battles, which I kind of wish we did, it would have been really cool to see how all of this shook out with the Seer versus the Ghost. We were kind of talking about that in post-game chat, how that would play out. He was pretty confident he would crush me. I was thinking I'd probably blow his armies up, but also lose a ton of stuff. He was saying, like, how would you fight me, man? And first of all, the Seer, because they don't have magic weapons, aren't going to chew through ghosts all that quickly. They chew through them rather slowly, actually, though they still chew through them. He was like, how would you kill him? And I was like, well, I'd probably Wind of Death both our armies, so killing them both. And then I would spam out a shit ton of Clouds of Death behind it. Because at this point, if he was going to Doomstack, I could probably bring, like, 12 plus Grand Lemurs and just drop a shit ton of it. There's also a small chance a fatigue play could work, though with him doing relief and having bloodlust, I don't know if it would, but it could. Anyway. But with Berserk, that's going to be a little counterproductive too on that. So anyway, it would have been interesting. I wish we got to have a fight. Okay, who am I missing? Early battles. Falegra. It was fun, man. I think I got the fort knocked out here in the first fight because I knew he was about to attack me like the next turn. Refused my nap. That said, I will say, buddy, if I offer you a nap and it's not a good matchup for you, I'd consider taking it. Plus, I was going to attack whoever didn't give me a nap because I knew they were going to be in on a coalition attacking me. So anyway, but it was a fun war. And interestingly, I never ran into his Doomstack. I just kept dodging it. And he probably thought he would be able to win because he had a Doomstack I couldn't fight. And indeed, if I ran into that Doomstack, it would be very costly. There was his god, there was a bunch of frontline chaff, there were a ton of crossbows with flaming arrows. It would have been very difficult for me to fight. He had fire elementals. It would have been very, very rough. But fortunately, I was able to just outrun it on the strategic map, and I never ended up really having to fight it until I got split to pieces, and all his forts were taken except his cap. Bugaroos hung in there until almost the end. Had a few valiant charges with huge mage stacks. It's really expensive doing that because, his research went to shit when he had to move all his mages out. But I think that's what is required if you're going to charge a big army into Lemuria. I don't know if he had supply items. I'm assuming he did. But I think going to war with Falegra as an ally is not sufficient. Against somebody who knows what they're doing. Like, I'll admit, I know what I'm doing with Lemuria. If you're playing like a player who may not really know how to play in Lemuria, you could get away with rushing him. But like, even if he won that first battle, like if he brought the right mage support and took a fort, I would have raided all his stuff. Like, he was just going to lose so much territory, and then, like, by the time he's trying to take another fort, I'm just going to take the first fort he took from me back. And it would be a pain in my ass, but... anyway, but, you know, he pieced out. He realized the war wasn't going his way. He got back a bunch of his other infrastructure and made a second play. Unfortunately, I don't think... You know, it took him too long to get these 2 forts back at the other end of his empire, and his armies were kind of shattered. So he didn't really get the late game or mid-late game Bogarus fully online with the blood economy and all of that stuff. So it would have been cool to see that, but yeah, while he was in a very grindy war with me, other people were busy conquering nations that gave gold. But it was a fun war. I think he made the march to Lemuria made for some very good YouTube content. So thanks for playing, bud. Enjoyed playing with you, and I mean. He had the right idea. He marched in a ton of eparchs, and then for his first army, which is a pretty good thing because you don't have any research, and eparchs are good. And he marched in a ton of mages in his second army. But at that time, the vultures were knocking on his door, and by that time we just had a ton of ghosts that we could march in and have some huge epic battle, which would have probably killed both our armies. But anyway, thanks for playing. Atlantis, you were chomping at the bit to fight me all game. You finally got your wish. But, yeah, it was... We had some pretty good battles. There were definitely times I was worried. Yeah. I don't know. There were good battles. I'm not sure what I would do particularly differently. If I were playing, I'd have to go back and watch the replay. But, I mean, I think in general, Atlantis did most of the things you would expect Atlantis to do. You know, they did a bunch of cleansing waters. They did water elementals when appropriate. You know, we could sit here and talk about correct army composition and things like that. I don't think they had Serpent's Blessing, which I think for Lemuria that has some access to Foul Vapors is something you probably want. That was something that was going to kind of plague him in the war with Pythium and the war with me. But yeah, it was a pretty good battle. Ultimately, I think he lost steam and gave up once basically all his armies got killed. But yeah, it was pretty good. And, you know, I mean, him attacking me at the same time as Calum, I think that made sense. Those are the 2 hard counters to Lemuria, and they were both fighting me at the same time. And they were both pretty big. I think by that time... Calum was a 2 to 3 cap nation, and Atlantis was kind of like a 1.5. So anyway, that was an exciting battle. Thanks for playing Atlantis. I think that was Thigh High, Succubi, and then Midgard. You took a long time to go down, so thanks for holding out. Your holdout definitely caused a lot of pain to all the people who attacked you. And definitely made space for me to continue eating other people. So in that way, how well you held out definitely had a very large impact on how the game played out. And not for the advantage of anybody who attacked you. So I think it's always good to have a reputation that you're going to inflict a heavy toll on those who go against you. And then Tis, it was good, man. It's kind of cool seeing the Skelly spam and stuff come online. I think if you had made a play earlier and eaten one of your neighbors, it might have gone better. I know you got a little bit of the Midgard action. I'm not sure what I would have done, who I would have attacked if I were you, but you got some of the Bogarus Agartha action too. So you did some solid vulturing. But I don't really understand late age statistics that well, so I don't really know who's a great matchup for them. I feel like they're a kind of weak nation. But I feel like in the mid-game, you probably needed to make a play against the living nation. And anyway, I don't know if I've shouted out to everybody. I know I've shouted out to Agartha. I think I've shouted out to most people. So anyway, thank you all for playing and watching. And I will see you guys in the next series. Cheers.